Steve and Meet again, another Bullseye Guy podcast. Great stuff coming as always, and super excited. I've got Salim on the podcast and known him for years, run into him at the global events around the world, but really a gracious opportunity to be able to sit down and learn more about him. I know you guys will be excited, not only his background and history and things he's done, but some of the really cool, exciting things he's done now as well. And with that, Salim, give us a little introduction. Let's go back, not all the way to the beginning, but let's go pre, you know what I'm talking about. Let's go pre
Sure.
and then there and then
Sure. Just
forward.
quick summary is I'm originally from India, schooling in university in Canada, 10 years in Europe, ended up in the US 20 years ago and started building tech companies. I built a predecessor to Twitter 18 months too early. Bad to be early in the tech space, better to be late. Many of you will realize that. And I ended up in Silicon Valley as the head of innovation at Yahoo, running their incubator. And learned kind of a fundamental lesson that's driving a lot of my thinking these days, which is when you try anything disruptive in a legacy environment, the immune system attacks you. And it turned out at Yahoo, the more disruptive an idea we came up with, the less the company could handle it, right? Because all our organizations are built for efficiency and predictability. And I went from, I set up a relationship between Yahoo and NASA to do some interesting projects. And the NASA people one day said, hey, we're helping put together this thing called Singularity University. We're having a founding conference with 70 thought leaders. We'd like you to be there. And for whatever reason, I'd never heard of Peter Diamandis, the X Prize, Ray Kurzweil, or even the Singularity. Somehow I'd missed all of that. And I walked into this weird event and asked, I was like, holy crap, this is nuts. I asked a lot of questions. And about 2 weeks later, Peter said, do you want to run it? So I'm the founding CEO at Singularity University.
Yeah, and for those, again, we're in the industry and in the know, so I've known these groups for years. For those people who don't know, talk about what the ethos of Singularity was.
Sure.
What it does and what attracted you to it, because it's a different mission than even what Yahoo was back in those early days.
Way different. So the core thinking comes from Ray Kurzweil, who noticed that Moore's law is operating now, the doubling pattern that we've seen every 18 months in price performance of computation is now occurring in a dozen technologies: drones, 3D printing, neuroscience, biotech, blockchain. They're all doubling every year or so in their price performance. We've never seen this many technologies move this quickly. And the thesis behind Singularity University was bring together the leading scientists, researchers, Nobel Prize winners, thought leaders in these fast-moving technologies and explore where they are going. Most academics think about the past. How did this model evolve? How did this equation develop? We were much more interested in where will this be? Where will blockchain be in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? Where are these technologies intersecting? What application areas do you expect to see at the intersections of these? What labs, companies, teams are doing the most interesting work to track? And so we were teaching the future, essentially. And we would bring in CEOs, government leaders, for a 1-week program and 80 of the top graduate students in the world for a summer program that was 10 weeks long. And we were really looking for who are the 30-year-olds that are going to be running the world in 10 years. If we can arm them with a better sense of where technology is going, they'll make better decisions than the current crop of leadership, unintended, that's running the world today. So that was the thesis behind Singularity. I ran it for 3 years and I led all the programs in a total for about 7 years. And on the back of that, I basically came up with the conclusion that we have 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time, right? In the 15th century, the printing press emerged and completely changed the world. And we now call that a Gutenberg moment because it completely transformed society. Right. Well, looking at all of these, I noticed that, well, solar energy changes the world completely. Blockchain changes the world completely. Autonomous cars. We have 20 of those hitting us at the same time. And we are not absorbing these into society quickly enough because of this immune system problem. Big companies have a tough time innovating, but it's worse in the public sector where you have a very strong immune system in the regulatory and policy, right? Bankers are fighting Bitcoin, taxis are fighting Uber. So coming out of the back of Singularity University, I wrote a book called Exponential Organizations. The question being, how do you scale an organization as fast as we can scale technology? And the book has become a much bigger deal than I predicted, and I've been chasing that around for a few years. Kind of went AWOL from Singularity, trying to deal with the demand coming out of the book. I've done workshops for probably 200 of the Fortune 500 and government leaders around the world, and heads of state, etc. And we've been working on a tool set. We built an ecosystem and around this model of exponential organizations, and a community and a tool set to solve this immune system problem.
And so I want to go back just a little bit, because when we get into what you're doing now, because it's interesting, Salim, you mentioned blockchain as part of Singularity, but when Singularity started, blockchain was the gleam in some programmer's eye.
Yeah.
What were some of the things early on that Singularity looked at? I remember AI being one of them before our artificial intelligence was there, but in the early days of Singularity, what were some of the things that you were looking into that have come to forbearance, 10 years later?
Yeah, so we started in 2000, we had the founding conference in September 2008. And it's worth, the speed of this is worth going into. So we had a founding conference to say, is it worth creating an educational institution focused on the future and focused only on accelerating technologies? We based it at NASA in Silicon Valley and got initial funding from Google, Cisco, Autodesk, Nokia to get started. That was September 2008. We had the founding conference. In October, we had the first board meeting. In November, we formed the initial faculty. In December, we chose the initial curriculum. In January, we fleshed out the curriculum. In February, we announced a TED in 2009. In March, we put out accepted applications from students. In April, we finished the curriculum. In May, we did logistics. In June, we started.
Yeah.
So we went from zero to a full university running with programs in 8 months, which I think is kind of reasonably unheard of. And how often do you get to launch a university? Right. Yeah. So I actually left my other startup behind and went and did this. And so initial group of technologies we were looking at was computation and AI underpinning everything, and then breakthrough areas like biotech, 3D printing, robotics, material science, nanotechnology, and then more into the application areas like autonomous cars, drones. Blockchain was one of the areas we looked at very early because we were tracking the Bitcoin paper from the minute it came out in 2009. But for many people, this type of thing had been tried so many times in the past. You never know whether Bitcoin will actually get traction. A few years ago, it was eCash and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So people have taken multiple cracks at it. It turned out Bitcoin took off. And so we spent a lot more effort and time on it in say 2011 onwards.
Yeah, and from the early days of Singularity, for the first, let's say, if we were to distill it down for the first 10 years, what are the top one or two things that you learned out of it that surprised you the most? Because Singularity was already set up to think big, but what surprised you the most?
I'll give you two positive and two negative. The positives were blockchain and solar energy and biotech. The speed at which those have gone has been mind-boggling. Solar energy, we're on track to be able to deliver all of the world's energy with solar in 8 years, which is just blows your mind. So that's an amazing thing. Biotech, the rise of CRISPR, and now these mRNA vaccines, which are not new, they've been in development for 40 years. That's an important point to make. The implications of CRISPR, meaning we can now edit the human genome, are unbelievable, because basically we're 10 trillion cells in the human body, each governed by the DNA, meaning the human being is now a software engineering problem, right? Which is kind of a mind-boggling thing.
Programmable. I was speaking to Naveen about that.
Exactly.
Programmable mRNA. It's not programmable DNA. It's gene level and sequencing.
Exactly. And blockchain, because of the ability to decentralize authentication. All of our authentication systems are centralized, government functions, banking, stamping. Yes, you have a credit rating. Yes, you have a passport. Yes, you have a driver's license. We can decentralize a massive amount of public effort now, and that's super exciting. So those are three of the positives. A couple of the negatives are, we thought autonomous cars would get a massively forward, much more so than they have. Turns out that driving a car needs adaptable human thinking much more so, and it's not that programmable, at least in the existing infrastructure. If you have sensor embedded roads, very easy. But you want to try and do things without changing infrastructure because the government takes forever to change. And it's taken a lot longer for autonomous cars to get going than we hoped. The other one is 3D printing. We thought would be much more pervasive today than it is. So those are a couple of the areas where we thought it would be much further ahead. But in general, we're totally surprised and blown away by the speed of acceleration and the intersection of these different environments.
Yeah, it's with the blockchain one again, because I'm deep in that, as you know, but I joke, before the internet, there was no internet, and people kind of laugh, but the internet's given us so many tools that allows us to accelerate and do things differently. And eventually there's no such thing as a blockchain company. It's just, I'm an ID company or I'm a game company. And so I think the blockchain will become ubiquitous, but the change for me, my one that I thought would be here quicker, and I've written articles on this, when Elon started boring tunnels under the ground, I was like, this is boring and it's never going to happen. I thought autonomous taxis would be here, flying taxis.
Yeah.
Point to point, flying over the highway. Like,
I have a very provocative comment about that. I think if autonomous taxis and autonomous drones were permissioned a few years ago, like they should have been, then Kobe Bryant would probably be alive today.
Yeah, and not self-flying. These aren't people. These are autonomous, like a bus route, point-to-point program.
Yeah, very doable.
I'm just baffled that that's not there. So let's talk about that, because that I think has led to a lot of what you're doing now. This legacy of infrastructure. We as entrepreneurs can envision things. We can look and go, geez, this would be easy if you didn't have these major impediments of legacy systems, whether it's legacy government or legacy corporations. These big organisms are difficult to change.
Yes.
Talk to us about the transition of what you realized and learned, and lead us into what you're doing now.
Yeah. So, obviously, if you're in consulting or whatever, you've seen this immune system before, and I've seen tons of this type of a problem in banks or insurance companies, right? They're set up to not change very much. But Yahoo was 10 years old in the Silicon Valley company. Why should it have this problem? And that's what really intrigued me. I studied it for a while, and I came up with the conclusion that any organization more than 50 people has an immune system problem, because the control framework and management structures mean that it's like a Roman army with shields and spears marching forward in a phalanx formation, chunk, 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 chunk. If you come in from the side, it doesn't matter how nice you are, you're going to get speared. Yeah, it's because the thing is just chunking along in this way. And I had enough experience with that going, wow, if we can't solve the legacy ability of organizations to adapt to this new world, then nothing, it doesn't matter what the breakthroughs are, and it doesn't matter what envisions or amazing application, we can't get it implemented, right? Bankers fighting Bitcoin is an easy answer. So we focused on that problem. And I remember talking to the CIO of Procter & Gamble, who came up to me and said, hey, book is required reading across the company. Can we work with you? And we noticed that in a big company, when they first encountered disruptive innovation, it took them about 3 years to actually do anything about it. We saw this with Dow Chemical and Caterpillar and you name it. So I said, listen, I've come up with an idea. I want to run a 10-week engagement inside P&G, and we want to hack culture at scale and solve this immune system problem. And so she was ready to go for it. We did it. And it worked. We ran a 10-week process that we now call an EXO sprint that breaks the immune system problem. We're able to move leadership, culture, management thinking 3 years ahead in 10 weeks. We found a way of hacking culture at scale in a big legacy organization. Even when we did P&G, I thought, okay, this worked really well, and maybe it was too easy. Maybe we caught them at the right time. Will it last, or will they go back to the old way after we leave? Right. I still had some doubts. So we ran it a second time with the largest insurance company in Mexico. Family-owned, regulated, insurance is pretty conservative, everything. And it worked even better. So we got excited. We formed an advisory practice around it. We've now done it 60 times with Black & Decker, HP, Visa, Siemens Energy, you name it. We run it around the world, different languages. And we're able to, our clients are getting an average 70 times return on investment from running this process. Which means we're charging too little, but that's a separate problem. And so we found a way of really systemically transforming culture and increasing the metabolism of legacy companies.
And so I want to delve deeper into that in a minute. But before that, I want to go back, because cultural change and leaderships, I think, is challenging. I dealt with this in Chicago, where your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. Sometimes the leaders don't think they need to change, or they think they're doing, and this may be confidential. If it is, then say, I can't talk about it. But I know that you had shared with me, you had gone to a local leader and said, hey, we have this great process for transforming government. Would you like it? And apparently he didn't take it. And you went to a different leader and he took that process, and that particular leader and city has accelerated to the nth degree past the prior one. Is that
somewhat? Let me. So once we cracked, after a couple of dozen of these in the private sector, we said, all right, let's now address public sector, because now much harder.
Yes.
You have to hack policy, regulatory, but much more important. And if you can do that, then you can change anything, right? So we adapted the process. It takes 16 weeks, but it works. And my first idea was, let's go solve corruption in Mexico City. Through this nonprofit that we based out of Miami. And my co-founder said, listen, we know you're ambitious and we really like you. We'd prefer you not die on the first project.
Yeah.
Right? Let's pick a more bite-sized thing. So we went to the city of Medellin and we ran it 4 times there and kind of learned the process. And then we came to Miami and ran this civic transformation process with Mayor Francis Suarez and Mayor Jimenez, who was the mayor of Miami-Dade County. And we took public transportation and said, let's see if we can transform public transportation and the way people thought about it and change the mindset. And so we ran our process. To give you a sense of the outcome, the old model for procurement is RFIs, RFPs, long-term technology deployment, right? What they're now doing is they've kind of scrapped all that, and they're doing experiments, small, lean startup type experiments in multiple areas: electric bikes in Doral, scooters on Miami Beach, ride sharing in the downtown corridor. And when they see something working, they merge into the mainstream infrastructure. So that shift from old style linear sequential to multiple experiments being run at very low cost. And when you have evidence that is working, you merge it in. That's what we can achieve in 16 weeks. And Miami's become a huge buzz nowadays, partly because we laid down all the vocabulary around this. My wife blames me for the real estate prices now.
Yeah, and that's what I want to. And I know you wouldn't take full credit for it. And I know I've met Suarez. There's a lot of people involved, but really that mindset of transformation, because if I'm correct, you actually had offered it to Los Angeles and LA said, no, we're fine.
Yeah.
And we can look at the dichotomous outputs here that are drastically different. Miami's this amazing epicenter, and it still has its challenges, as does all major metropolitans, but it's really fascinating, the mindset and the ethos and the cultural change that you can see at the governmental level that's now transformed down into the private sector. So when you look for opportunities, where do you think with your company now, where's the bigger growth opportunity and impact? Is it government? Is it big private corporate?
We have an MTP, or a massive transformative purpose, okay? And that's to transform society. And that involves kind of the transformation of 3 separate segments. One is business and private sector, the second is public sector, and the third is our institutions. We've built sprints to break the immune system in private sector and public sector now. We're now working on our 3rd sprint, which is how would you hack the immune system in education or journalism or monetary systems or legal systems. There's about 50 institutions by which we run the world, and each has their own immune system, right? Anybody who's in academia knows how bad the immune system is in academia. God help you if you try and transform that. And so we're working on that at the moment, that third institutional immune system. We've successfully run private and public sector, and we now have an ecosystem and a community of consultants around the world that's now 17,000 people in 130 countries. And we arm them with these tools. We go, here's the way you run a sprint, go transform your local companies, your local governments, etc. And they're starting to do it. Maybe the most insane thing about the book that came out, which was now like 8 years old, about 3 years ago, a political consulting firm approached me and they said, hey, we'd like to partner with you. And I said, how? And they said, we use your book to advise heads of state. I'm like, wait, what? It's totally not designed for that. What are you talking about? They said, well, we use it to advise presidents and prime ministers. And when I looked into it, it turned out to be 36. And I just couldn't believe that number. So I went around and visited 7 of them with this fellow in 2019 before the pandemic hit. And I realized, wait a minute, we have a community, we have a tool set, we have credibility, and now we have access, right? What could we do with that? So we've kind of crafted a plan saying, wow, let's just go hack the world. And so the plan involves, okay, let's do a think tank type of approach to say, what should our institutions look like? Taking into account all the technological breakthroughs, right? Like neural implants. If Elon Musk works with his neural implant, that completely will change education.
Yeah.
What could education look like in that new model? Because nobody's thought about what it could look like. We know what's wrong. We haven't thought about it. So let's craft that picture. Secondly, if we create a small army, like a Peace Corps, in every major city around the world that can start implementing these ideas, you get the demand and the supply side handled, and we can just literally change the world in about a generation. I think it'll take. So that's what we're going after.
And so, and again, some of these things you and I have spoken about, so I want to make sure we elicit and highlight them. Talk about the structure of the organization in terms of, how you're structured, what you do, and then transition that into how you work with a large organization. Like, what's the structure now? You're basically a decentralized consultant organization. If we
you can think
explain
of us
it very simply,
you could think of us as a decentralized McKinsey's. And there are two major innovations that we have under our belt. One is we have this 10-week sprint that hacks the immune system. And we've done, after doing it 60 times, we can show unbelievable value creation on that. It's a no-brainer. The more important innovation, I think, is we've learned how to run that process in the community itself. So we have no consultants on staff. We source every project from the community members. We train them, we give them badges, we rate them. And managing quality is obviously critical if you're working with P&G or Visa. And we've learned how to do that. So those two innovations allow us to scale, and we're taking our community and our ecosystem and turning into a DAO. And we've been tracking DAOs for 4 or 5 years now, and our big concern was governance, right? If you decentralize too quickly, you end up with a giant global shareholders meeting on a nonstop basis with hecklers nonstop, right? And nothing gets done. If you stay centralized, then you lose trust. So you have to find a very careful, and we've been slow. It's taken us 4 years to slowly decentralize financial voting, governance voting, and we're now about ready to light the match on formalizing as a DAO formally.
Okay. And within that organization, right? So a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, for people that don't know the acronym, a technical DAO, there is no company. It's fascinating because it's a company, but there actually is no company because you're a decentralized organization.
It's essentially a co-op running on the blockchain, governed by smart contracts that allow you to now. And what got me excited was the NFT world. Right, I've gone really deep in the NFT world over the last 6 months, and I have a crazy funny story to tell you if your folks are interested. But having gone deep in that, we realized that NFTs allow you to manage a large group of people programmatically, and you can incent behaviors, etc. So we're essentially turning ourselves into a DAO run by NFT badges. We already have badges in our platform for what levels of consulting people are at. And now we can kind of programmatically manage the whole thing. And that means we can scale. That's why a DAO is interesting, because you can scale autonomously.
Yeah, and that's where we may have to do a whole separate one on NFTs and blockchain, and you and I can jump in. And actually, we're launching a company in a week for NFBs. I see all of them. We're doing non-fungible books.
Oh,
so it's
very
a book,
cool.
self-book publishing tool, copyright, pre-copyright, limiteds, rares, signed. So, but the third leg of that non-fungible book publishing platform is the community aspect of what you can wrap around. An NFT is technically just a programmable contract that says, what can you, so that's where I think people miss the NFT. They think it's the art allocation. And to me, it's the community rule set of what you can build around an asset that's where the value is going to be.
Yes, that I think is a really important insight. It's not about a monkey on a JPEG, right?
Yeah,
it's about the utility of what it took me a good 2-3 months going deep into this to click into it, but then that's what I got excited about.
Yeah, it's the programmable smart contract that allows you community involvement, community engagement, that touch point from the creator, whether it's an author, a musician, anything, to their audience, that's that quarter mile connection. And again, people like, what do you think of NFTs? I'm like, certificate of authentication, not interested. Programmable community involvement, game changer.
Yeah, huge.
So again, that could be a different conversation for a different time. Let's talk about a community as a company. These companies are massive insular communities. They think they're decentralized, and they're not. When you go in and work with a big company, as we're getting towards the end, how does that work with a company or a government? Is it a certain number of stakeholders? Is it shareholders? Is it?
Let me describe how it works and why it works.
Yeah,
okay?
Thank you.
Okay. What we do is, say, Procter & Gamble. We worked on shared services, which is 7,000 people in IT provisioning, payroll, expense management inside P&G. We get the top 10% of senior management together, and we do a Singularity-style technology shock and awe workshop, specifically aimed at blowing their minds, very much shock and awe, freak them out. Create that emotional uncertainty about the future so that they're less likely to say no to new ideas. In big companies, the default answer for new ideas is no. And we kind of change the mindset. So you do that opening workshop, you leave them alone because they're kind of useless for the future anyway. If you've done 20 years of supply chain management in a car company, you're useless for the future, right? Okay. Then you take 25 young leaders and future lieutenants of the business. They actually do the work. It's kind of a coaching model. They divide into 4 teams. 2 teams are looking at what disruptive ideas can I create at the edge of the company to blow it open 10x. And the second 2 teams are looking at what do I do internally to increase the metabolism and transform the mothership.
Okay.
And they do 2 5-week innovation cycles. And at the end, they present ideas. If senior management likes the ideas, they fund them. What we found is by freaking out the incumbents, when the new ideas arrive, they don't say no. And then when those 25 young leaders go back to their day jobs, it takes about 30% of their time during this 10-week period. When they go back to their day jobs, they infect everybody else. And so that's what creates the cultural transformation. We're introducing a viral meme into the organization that then spreads throughout the entire organization and results in a state change of the subconscious of the organization. So a summary of what we do is in the same way that Landmark Education or Tony Robbins uses neuro-linguistic programming to create a state change in the subconscious of an individual. We've learned how to do that in an organization at very unprecedented speed.
And again, I've studied NLP. I used to pick Tony Robbins up when he wrote his first book, Unlimited Power.
Yeah. When
I was running sales training in Kansas City, I used to pick Tony up when he was still doing his own pre-sale.
Yeah.
I'd pick him up, he'd come pre-sell my group to sell tickets. So I love that capacity going back. The biggest challenge, though, once that's there, Salim, that small group, they're the evangelists.
Yeah.
Right? How do you then metastasize that in a positive way through the cultural side of the rest of the organization? How do you get cultural buy-in?
What happens is they get so excited by the work they're doing and the potential and the possibilities that they see during this 10-week process. When they go back to their day jobs as a financial accountant or a supply chain manager or whatever, they literally infect everybody else with their enthusiasm. And then it turns out that's about enough to transform an organization of 7,000 people. Just those 25 key leaders is enough to transform the whole organization. And so and now that we've done it like 60 times, we've honed it too. We found if we do 3 teams or 2 teams as opposed to 4, you don't hit the critical mass needed, right? But 4 teams is about the right. 4 to 6 teams will give you the critical mass needed to change a multi-thousand person organization and move it from an old metabolism into a new environment.
Interesting, because that's where I was in an entrepreneurial setting. That chasm is 10. It's 10 people in an entrepreneurial side that allows you to grow. That's why it's fascinating. So you figured out there's a distinctive, definitive number in a large, complex organization, and you figured out what that number is. That's what I was curious on.
Yeah, we found about 4 teams is enough. And 4 teams is needed anywhere from 5,000 to about 7,000 people. Sorry, 500 to about 7,000 people. Mid-market to junior big company.
All right, and so I love this, and again, I could talk to you for hours, but let's close this up for you as a target. We're 20. I don't know what year we are. I've had the
2022.
COVID gap year. So in the next 12 months, that way this becomes evergreen and timeless. In the next 12 months, what's the biggest focus for you, or what are the things you're trying to accomplish? Companies, countries, or goals?
All of the above. The two big ones are we're launching the second edition of the book. Peter Diamandis is co-authoring that with me. We'll do a soft launch in June and a full launch in September. So in a month, we'll do a soft launch of the second edition. The second is we are coming out with some ridiculous data that we came across. And I'd love to just summarize this real quick.
Yeah.
When we launched the book, we created a diagnostic survey at the end of the book to say how EXO friendly is your organization, and we come up with a quantified score. We ask 25 questions, 1 to 4, and we give you a score. We ranked the Fortune 100 when the book came out by this EXO score, and I did a segment on CNBC Squawk Box, and I presented, here's an index of the Fortune 100 ranked by the flexibility, the agility, and scalability of the org structure. To what extent is IBM using lean startup thinking? To what extent is GE purpose-driven or not, et cetera? We just did a 7-year trailing analysis of that index and said, okay, how did those companies do over 7 years? Because we tracked which companies in those 7 years kept using them the most and which used them the least. When you compare the top 10 most agile companies, in our opinion, compared to the least agile, okay, revenue growth of the top 10 is 3 times bigger than the bottom 10. Profitability is 6.5 times higher. Return on equity is 11 times higher, but shareholder returns are 40 times higher.
Wow.
We should have created an ETF.
We should just, I was going to say, we should have done a mutual fund basket of the
why did we not do this?
Flexibility companies.
Because the external thesis is simple. As the external world becomes more volatile, your ability to adapt is going to drive market value. We can now prove that 6 ways to Sunday, and we can also have a tool set to help companies become more agile. So now it's just about getting it out there. Our view is every organization in the world has to run through this process with or without us. So we've open sourced it. We actually have written a book on how to do it if you want to just self-select on that.
Wow, amazing stuff, Salim. So again, from the Yahoos, where we've been in the early days, to the Singularities, to changing the world with open source IP around knowledge bases, is just fascinating. So great stuff. We'll circle back on the, God, I don't like using that word. It's been pejorative. We will come back to you on the book launch, see what we can do to help. But again, thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Great to be here, Stephen. Love to talk to you always.
Thank you.